Hi, in this week's video, I'm going to show you how to create an amazing budget Peloton setup. And compared to this, the Peloton Bike is about 75% cheaper and the subscription is about 1/3 of the price. There's quite a few videos on YouTube about creating your own budget Peloton setup, but most of those people haven't done nearly 800 Peloton workouts, including over 350 rides on a real Peloton bike. Now, the first thing to say is if you're on the fence about whether to get a Peloton bike or not, then just buy a Peloton bike. They are fantastic and nearly always on their website, in fact always I think, but double check, there's a 30-day money back guarantee if you're not happy with it. However, if you don't want to spend $13.50 on an exercise bike or $22.95 on the Bike Plus, these are expensive products. And in addition to that, the subscription is just under $500 a year as well. If you don't want to spend that kind of money, then this is a fantastic alternative. So first you're going to need a Peloton subscription. Now with the bike, this is $39 a month, but we only need the app. So the app version is only $12.99 a month. Next, you're going to need a bike. I chose the Labgrey L1 bike. This cost me $2.99 from Amazon, and I will link to it in the description so you go straight to this bike and this model. So here's the reasons why I chose this particular bike. So firstly, it's belt driven. So this is going fairly fast. And as you can hear, it's almost silent. So this is really useful if you live with other people or you live in an apartment, for example. There's just no sound. Your breathing will be a lot louder than this bike is. It's also got a really nice size flywheel. So this is 16.5 kilos or 35 pounds, which is quite important when you're using a home spin bike. I've never felt like I was going to overpower this wheel. If you get a really light flywheel, sometimes you can just feel like there's nothing there. The resistance on this is fantastic. My preferred braking option would be a magnetic one. This has a wall brake here, but it does seem to work really well in offering resistance for the rider. The handlebars have plenty of adjustment for height. You've got a water bottle holder as well. The seat has height adjustment and what's really important as well, forward and back adjustment as well. The pedals are metal, which surprised me, and they've got a cage there for you to hold your foot in when you're cycling. Overall, I think Labgrey have put together a really good quality bike for this budget price point. It has a basic computer so you can scan through time, speed, distance, odo, pulse and calories. One thing I really like is the pulse reader here is fantastic. It's really, really quick. It just picks up your pulse in a second or two. The best thing I like about this computer though is this. You can flip it away and just put your iPad there. Perfect. The setup I'm actually going to be using though is the iPad here on the computer and a phone on the lower holder here, and I'll explain why in a moment. When it comes to the rides, you can use your phone here, which is okay, I'd say. If you've got a tablet, then that looks even better than a phone. However, if you've got a TV, if you can set up in front of a TV, then as you can see there, this is a far superior setup. Now, to be honest, an iPad or a tablet is probably fine. It's a good setup. But if you've got something like a Fire Stick or an Apple TV, or you can actually screencast to your television and you can put the bike in front of a television, then what you're missing out here on perhaps not having the same quality as a Peloton bike, you're making up for with a much more immersive experience on a larger screen. Now, when you're riding on a Peloton bike, this is a Peloton bike screen, the instructor will call out cadence, resistance, and output. So these are your three metrics. That's cadence, resistance, and output. Now, cadence is really simple. It's just RPM, it's revolutions per minute, and it's how many times your foot goes round in a full rotation per minute. And this is like miles per hour. So 30 miles an hour on a bike is the same as 30 miles an hour in a Bentley. You can make a direct comparison to cadence on this and you can on the budget setup here. Now, many sort of budget spin bikes do have speed, but they don't show cadence. So let me show you how to set up cadence on the Labgrey. Fitting the cadence sensor is really easy. You just take out the packet, connect it to its bracket, and then you can just stick it here to the back of your pedal. and you're good to go. The sensor just switches itself on when you start pedaling, so you don't have to reach down to ever touch it. Then as soon as you start pedaling, it brings up your cadence there and the time of your workout. Now, when it comes to the third metric, which was output, that's your total output in watts. That's, I would say, less important, because as long as you've got your cadence right and your resistance right, then your output is automatic, because it's a result of getting those two things right. So with the resistance, it's a little bit trickier. Let me show you what I mean. A Peloton bike's resistance goes from 0 to 100. Let me just turn this up. And the instructor will call out cadence and resistance. As I've mentioned, we've handled the cadence. Now with the resistance, they might call out, say, 55 resistance, which is going to be difficult on any bike, any other bike, because you've either got a different measurement, or like this bike has a plus and a minus, so that turns the resistance up, that turns the resistance down. So because the resistance levels on a Peloton are unique to Peloton, you can't buy another bike with the exact same resistance levels. You'll need to kind of work out, when they're calling out a resistance level, what you're going to use on your bike. Now, to do this, I would suggest using a perceived exertion. So that's a perception of your level of effort. And it's not a direct comparison. So if the Peloton instructor calls out a resistance of 40, that's not 40% of your max effort. So 0 would be 0 effort, 100 would be 100% of your max effort. I would recommend to start with, and what I've found, especially on the Labgrey, is to add 20 to whatever the Peloton instructor tells you. So if the instructor says put your resistance at 50, then I would mentally know that I need to be at 70% of my maximum output. Another example would be if you're warming up and they say put your resistance at 30, then I would add 20 and know that's about 50% of my max output. I hope this makes sense. All right, so let's put this Labgrey through some tough rides. So the first ride I'm going to do with the Labgrey is a Tabata ride. Now, I wouldn't recommend a Tabata ride if you're new to this. It's a ratio of 2 to 1, which means you have 20 seconds flat out and only 10 seconds rest. I don't do Tabata rides. I don't find them much fun. They're just work. But they are a really good way to test this bike out, because there's going to be lots of changes in cadence and resistance, and it's going to be tough on the bike as well as me. So that was a tough ride. As I've mentioned, Tabata is not for the faint-hearted. Faint-hearted, I don't like doing them. The bike held up really well. So there was a lot of max intervals and then barely nothing, max again, barely nothing. The resistance, because it's got a wool pad resistance, does feel a lot different to the Peloton bike. So initially I thought it didn't really have much resistance on the bike, but I don't know if you can see. I mean, that was, if I was doing that on the Peloton bike, I would say I'd be in the same condition I am now. Oh man, if I saw Dr. Tabata, the man who invented these workouts on the street, I would have words with that motherfucker. So I'm going to do one more ride with this, which is a climb ride. The reason I picked a climb ride, which is another hard ride. So if you're new to all this, climb rides and Tabata rides are not rides that I think you should start with. You should start with beginner rides. But I'm going to do a climb ride because I'll be up out of the saddle for a lot of it. So I'll be really putting pressure on that flywheel. And I want to see if I can overpower it. So I want to see if I can put so much power down on the pedals that the flywheel slips, which means we're not in a good place really, because you don't really want that to happen. You want to be able to do hard rides with confidence. Okay, so I'm done in again. If you're thinking that I don't seem quite as out of breath as I did on the last ride, that's because I've just filmed this whole segment and then realised I had the camera on slow-mo, so I'm having to refilm it. But I'm all sweaty, as you can probably see here, and I would say the workout, how I feel now or immediately after this ride, was the same as how I would feel after being on the Peloton bike. So it doesn't feel as robust as the Peloton Bike when you're grabbing onto it really hard, but it's important to remember that the Peloton Bike, well, the Bike Plus I've got here is nearly 7 times the price. So for the price, it feels really good. So although it moves a little bit, it doesn't feel like it's going to fall over at any time or I'm going to sort of go forward on it or anything like that. It's very solid and very planted. One thing where it does trump the Peloton Bike though is this seat. So this seat is much more comfortable than a Peloton Bike seat. It's a pleasure to sit on. Now, there is one chink in its armour, and I was reluctant to kind of talk about this because I don't think that the vast majority of people will notice this unless I tell them. Now, I'm going to talk about pigeons first. About 25 years ago, somebody said to me, 1 in 10 pigeons has got a deformed foot. Now, I thought nothing of this, but for the last quarter of a century, every time I see a pigeon, I have to look at his foot. And if there's 10 pigeons, especially I have to count the pigeons and see what percentage of these pigeons have got a deformed foot. So that stayed with me and now it's with you and I'm sorry. So with this bike, what I did notice was that when you're pushing down hard on the pedals with a lot of resistance on, your front foot is feeling about 70% of the resistance and your back foot's feeling about 30%. And then when you go over, 70% and 30%. This will probably feel just like a normal bike. If you're cycling on a normal bike up a hill, all the pressure, isn't it, is through your front foot all the time. There's not a lot coming through the back foot. With a Peloton bike, the resistance is more equalised. So when you're pushing down on the front foot, you can pull up on the back foot, which is actually quite hard to do, to push with one foot and pull with the other foot. I haven't mastered it after 350 rides. So the Peloton bike is better balanced for the down and the up at the same time. This feels more like a normal bicycle where your front foot is doing most of the work. I hope that makes sense. The one thing I really liked about this bike was that I couldn't overpower it. So when I tried, I kept pushing the resistance, and I couldn't pedal any more before the bike ran out of resistance. So unless you're an elite cyclist, you're not going to be able to overpower this bike, I don't think. And it also didn't slip at any point either. So sometimes with a belt-driven bike, if it's a cheaper bike, it can start to slip if you really put power on it. But this held its own. So finally, and we're nearing the end now. Now I haven't edited this video, but I feel like it might be a long one because I seem to have been quite thorough. But stay with me, we're nearly at the end. So finally, the Peloton bike is $1,350 to buy. Now this is the Bike Plus, which is $2,295, but the standard bike is $1,350. The subscription on the Peloton bike is $39 a month. So over a 3-year period, that's $1,400. And you will need a pair of Peloton cycling shoes with the special clips, which are around $100. So the total cost for a standard Peloton bike with shoes and subscription over 3 years is about $2,850. You can add about $900 to that for the Bike Plus, which is over here. Now, when it comes to the Labgrey, the bike cost $299, the cadence sensor was $29.99, and the subscription is only $12.99 a month. No special shoes are needed for the Labgrey because it's got cage clips. So that makes the total cost of the bike, the cadence sensor and 3 years subscription $799 compared to $28.50. So that $799 price doesn't assume that you've got a tablet or a smartphone or a TV you can use as well. Now I've drunk the Peloton Kool-Aid, as you probably can see, but two grand over 3 years is a pretty big difference, isn't it? Let me know what you think in the comments. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time, see you soon.